The observation deck of the Galactic Council station hummed with nervous energy. Representatives from 17 different species pressed against the reinforced viewing panels, their various appendages trembling as they watched the massive cargo transport approach. Inside that vessel was something that had sent shockwaves throughout the known galaxy, a creature so dangerous that even mentioning its name caused seasoned warriors to shudder. A Vorthak. Commander Zilthak of the Reptilian Defense Force adjusted his ceremonial armor with clawed hands that refused to stay steady. His scales, normally a proud emerald green, had shifted to a sickly yellow, a clear sign of his distress. Beside him, the insectoid ambassador Clicktar's mandibles chattered in rapid succession, producing a sound like breaking glass that made everyone nearby wince. "This is madness," Zilthak hissed through his forked tongue. "Bringing one of those monsters here, to the heart of civilized space. What were the humans thinking?" Ambassador Veltar, a graceful being whose translucent blue skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, rippled her concern through color changes across her elongated form. "The humans claim they have made contact with it. They say it is cooperative." The word cooperative hung in the air like a bad smell. Every being on that observation deck knew what a Vorthak was capable of. These creatures were living nightmares, massive draconic beasts that measured nearly 30 meters from snout to tail, covered in scales harder than military-grade armor plating. Their breath could melt through reinforced steel, and their claws could tear through a battleship's hull like paper. More terrifying still was their intelligence. Vorthaks weren't mindless beasts. They were calculating predators with minds sharp enough to outthink most military strategists. In the 300 years since first contact with the species, they had been responsible for the destruction of 12 space stations, 47 colony worlds, and countless smaller vessels. The phrase Vorthak attack had become synonymous with total annihilation. And now the humans, those strange, soft-skinned mammals who had only recently joined the Galactic Council, claimed to have tamed one. Dr. Yexhai, the station's chief xenobiologist, scuttled forward on his 6 legs, his multiple eyes focused intently on the approaching transport. His species, the hexapods, were known throughout the galaxy for their scientific precision and logical thinking. If anyone could make sense of this impossible situation, it would be him. "The biological readings are extraordinary," Dr. Yexahai clicked, his translator struggling with the rapid-fire series of sounds his species used for communication. "The creature is indeed a full-grown Vorthak, approximately 28 meters in length, but the stress hormone readings are unusual." "Unusual how?" Commander Zilthak demanded, his tail lashing behind him in agitation. "They're almost non-existent. This creature shows no signs of the hyper-aggressive state that we've documented in every previous Vorthak encounter. It's as if—" Dr. Yexhai paused, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. "It's as if it's completely calm." A collective shudder ran through the assembled beings. A calm Vorthak was somehow more terrifying than an enraged one. At least when they were in their typical berserker state, you knew what to expect. Total destruction. But a calculating, controlled Vorthak? That was beyond their worst nightmares. The transport ship New Horizons settled into the docking bay with mechanical precision. It was a human vessel, sleek and efficient in the way that human technology tended to be. Not as elegant as Veltar's people's bioships, not as heavily armored as Zilthak's military craft, but practical and reliable. The humans had a talent for creating things that simply worked, regardless of how they looked. Captain Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the communication system, her tone carrying the easy confidence that seemed to characterize most humans. "Galactic Council Station Alpha, this is Captain Chen of the New Horizons. We're requesting permission to begin the transfer sequence." Station Commander Thurvok, a massive being whose species had evolved in heavy gravity, leaned his bulk over the communication console. His voice rumbled like an avalanche. "Captain Chen, are you absolutely certain your passenger is secure?" There was a sound from the human ship that took the translator systems a moment to identify. Laughter. Actual laughter, as if this entire situation was somehow amusing rather than terrifying. "Oh, Scarscale is perfectly behaved, Commander. We've had 0 incidents during the entire journey. In fact, he's been quite the gentleman." The translator systems struggled with the human term gentleman, eventually settling on something roughly equivalent to civilized individual of good character. The assembled beings exchanged looks of disbelief. Applying such a term to a Vorthok was like calling a star a small campfire. Scarscale? Ambassador Clicktar's mandibles clicked in confusion. "They've given it a name?" Dr. Yexhai was studying his readings with increasing fascination. "The creature's neural activity patterns are unlike anything in our databases. There's a complexity here that suggests emotional depth, perhaps even what humans might call feelings." The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. The idea that a Vorthak might have feelings was revolutionary and deeply disturbing. Emotions implied the capacity for relationships, for bonds, for affection. It was easier to think of them as mindless destroyers than as thinking, feeling beings. The docking clamps engaged with a series of metallic clangs that echoed through the station. Everyone pressed closer to the viewing panels, despite every instinct screaming at them to run in the opposite direction. The cargo bay doors of the human ship began to open with agonizing slowness. The assembled beings held their collective breath, waiting for their first glimpse of the legendary monster. What they saw defied every expectation. The Vorthak that emerged from the ship was indeed massive, a creature of impossible size and clearly devastating power. Its scales were deep crimson shot through with veins of gold, and even in the artificial light of the docking bay, they seemed to glow with inner fire. Its wings, folded against its body, still stretched nearly 15 meters from tip to tip. When it moved, it was with a fluid grace that spoke of perfect muscular control and deadly precision. But something was wrong. Or rather, something was very different from every previous encounter with the species. The creature moved slowly, deliberately, but not with the predatory stalking motion that had been documented in countless military reports. Instead, it seemed almost careful. Its massive head turned this way and that, but not in the aggressive scanning pattern of a hunter. It was looking around with what could only be described as curiosity. And walking beside it, completely unafraid and chattering away in the way humans did, was a small figure that made every being on the observation deck question their eyesight. It was a human child. A boy, probably no more than 8 or 9 years old by human standards, walked alongside the most dangerous predator in known space as if it were a beloved pet. He was small even by human standards, with unruly brown hair and the kind of fearless energy that characterized young humans. He wore simple clothes, a blue shirt and dark pants, and carried what appeared to be a small bag over his shoulder. "This is impossible," Commander Zilthak whispered, his scales now cycling through colors that had no names in any language. "A human child cannot be in proximity to a Vorthak. It would be killed instantly." But the child was very much alive, and more than that, he seemed completely at ease. He skipped along beside the massive creature, occasionally reaching up to pat one of its lower legs. Each time he did this, the Vorthak would pause and lower its great head slightly, as if acknowledging the contact. Dr. Yexhai's instruments were going wild. "The biochemical readings are unprecedented. The creature is producing oxytocin analogs, bonding hormones, but that's impossible. Vorthaks don't form bonds. They're solitary apex predators." "What about the child?" Ambassador Veltar asked, her bioluminescent patterns flickering rapidly with stress. "Surely the human is terrified. Humans produce distinct chemical signatures when frightened. Dr. HFY checked his readings again, then checked them a third time. No fear pheromones, no stress hormones. In fact, the child appears to be happy? The word came out like a question because it seemed so impossible. But there was no denying what they were seeing. The human child was practically bouncing with excitement as he walked beside the galaxy's most feared predator. Captain Chen's voice came through the communication system again. "Station Control, we're ready to proceed to the main conference chamber. Tommy's excited to meet everyone." "Tommy?" Station Commander Thurvok's voice cracked slightly on the unfamiliar human name. "That's right. Tommy Harrison, age 8, first human to achieve peaceful contact with a Vorthak. Though between you and me, I think Scarscale is more attached to Tommy than the other way around." The implications of this statement rippled through the observation deck like shockwaves. Not only had a human child somehow survived an encounter with a Vorthak, but he had apparently formed some kind of relationship with it, and the creature, this legendary monster, was attached to the child. The docking bay filled with human personnel as they prepared to escort their unusual passengers to the conference chamber. But what struck the observers was how relaxed the humans were. They weren't wearing heavy armor or carrying the massive weapons typically required for Vorthak containment. They moved around the creature as if it were a large but harmless animal. The boy, Tommy, had stopped beside one of the Vorthak's front legs and was digging through his small bag. The assembled aliens watched in fascination as he pulled out what appeared to be a piece of food and offered it up to the creature's massive head. The Vorthak lowered its head until it was level with the child, and with delicate precision that seemed impossible for something so large, it accepted the offering. Its great jaws could have easily swallowed the child whole, but instead it took the food gently, careful not to even brush the boy with its teeth. "By all the stars," whispered Ambassador Clicktar, "it's being gentle." Dr. HFY was frantically taking readings. "The neural patterns are extraordinary. There's a level of cognitive control here that we've never seen in any Vorthak specimen. It's actively suppressing its predatory responses." "But why?" Commander Zilthak demanded. "What could possibly motivate a Vorthak to control itself around prey?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The station's AI, which had been analyzing all available data, spoke in its calm, synthesized voice. "Analysis of behavioral patterns suggests the creature has formed what humans term a protective bond with the child. All observed actions indicate the Vorthak considers the human offspring to be under its protection." The observation deck fell silent as the implications sank in. A Vorthak, a creature that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, had somehow developed protective instincts toward a human child. It was rewriting everything they thought they knew about the species. Down in the docking bay, the escort was beginning to move toward the conference chamber. The boy chatted happily to his enormous companion, occasionally gesturing with his hands in the way human children did when excited. The Vorthak listened with what could only be described as attention. Its great head turned slightly toward the child to catch every word. As they passed beneath the observation deck, the boy looked up and waved enthusiastically at the viewing panel. Several of the assembled beings involuntarily stepped backward, even though they were safely behind reinforced barriers. The Vorthak followed the child's gaze upward, and for a moment every being on the observation deck found themselves staring into eyes that burned like molten gold. But instead of the predatory hunger they expected, there was something else. Intelligence, yes, but also something that might have been curiosity, even friendliness. Then the moment passed, and the strange procession continued on its way toward the conference chamber, where the real negotiations would begin. "This changes everything," Dr. HFY said quietly. If humans can form these kinds of bonds with Vorthax, if they can somehow reach past the aggression and connect with whatever lies beneath. He didn't finish the thought, but everyone understood. For 300 years, the galaxy had lived in terror of the Vorthax species. Wars had been fought, colonies abandoned, entire sectors of space declared off limits because of these creatures. The very mention of their name could clear a room or send military fleets into retreat. But if a single human child could somehow befriend one of these monsters, if that friendship was real and lasting, then everything they thought they knew about the universe was wrong. Ambassador Veltar's patterns shifted to deep blues and purples, colors that in her species indicated profound thought. We must understand how this happened. The implications for galactic peace, for our understanding of interspecies relationships? Commander Zilthak was still staring at the empty docking bay, his scales slowly returning to their normal green. "The humans," he said slowly. "They're not like the rest of us, are they? We see a monster and we prepare for war. They see a monster and somehow they see a friend?" The observation deck buzzed with activity as representatives began making urgent communications to their homeworlds. This was news that would reshape the galaxy. A human child had done what entire military fleets could not. He had made peace with a Vorthak. But perhaps the most remarkable thing was how normal it all seemed to the humans. They treated it not as a miraculous breakthrough in xenobiology or a revolutionary moment in galactic history, but simply as a boy and his unusual friend. As the last of the human escort disappeared into the station's corridors, Dr. Yexhai turned to his colleagues. "We need to prepare for the conference, but I suspect that everything we thought we knew about intelligence, about emotion, about the nature of predator-prey relationships is about to be challenged." In the distance, they could hear the sound of human laughter. The boy, delighted by something his massive companion had done. It was a sound that had never before echoed through a space station in the presence of a Vorthak. It was the sound of the galaxy changing. The main conference chamber of Galactic Council Station Alpha had never hosted anything quite like this before. The massive circular room, designed to accommodate beings of various sizes and environmental needs, had been hastily reconfigured to handle a guest that required special considerations. The ceiling had been raised to its maximum height. Atmospheric processors had been adjusted to accommodate a creature that breathed superheated gases, and the floor had been reinforced with additional support beams. Despite these preparations, when Scarscale entered the chamber, his presence dominated the space in a way that made even the largest council members feel small. Tommy Harrison, walking beside his massive friend with the casual confidence of any 8-year-old showing off his pet, seemed completely oblivious to the tension his presence created. He clutched his small backpack in one hand and occasionally patted Scarscale's leg with the other, chattering away about the interesting things he'd seen on the space station. "Did you see all those different kinds of aliens, Scarscale? That one with all the tentacles was really cool. And the one that glows. Did you notice how she changes colors when she talks? I wonder if she's trying to say something with the colors, too." The Vorthak listened to every word, occasionally rumbling responses that the boy seemed to understand perfectly, even though the translator systems could make no sense of the creature's vocalizations. The sounds were too low, too complex, filled with harmonic frequencies that spoke of intelligence, but remained frustratingly beyond the reach of even the most sophisticated translation matrix. Captain Chen followed behind them, her expression a mixture of pride and barely contained amusement. She had been the commanding officer when first contact was made, and even she sometimes couldn't quite believe how naturally Tommy had taken to interspecies diplomacy. The assembled council members had arranged themselves in a careful semicircle, maintaining what they hoped was a safe distance while still appearing diplomatic. Each species had sent their finest representatives, military commanders, senior diplomats, xenobiologists, and cultural specialists. They had prepared for every conceivable scenario, except the one actually unfolding before them. Station Commander Thurvok called the session to order, his massive form imposing even next to the Vorthak. His species had evolved on a world where everything was trying to eat them, and they had survived by becoming too big and too tough to be easy prey. Even so, his voice carried a slight tremor as he spoke. This emergency session of the Galactic Council has been called to address the unprecedented situation involving the human delegation and their companion. We are here to understand how this relationship developed and what it means for galactic security. Tommy had found a spot near the center of the chamber where he could sit, cross-legged on the floor. Scarscale curled his massive form around the boy in a protective circle, his great head resting on the ground near Tommy's shoulder. The gesture was unmistakably protective, and it sent ripples of unease through the assembled delegates. Dr. HFY stepped forward, his multiple eyes focused on the pair with scientific fascination. If we may begin with some basic questions, how did this contact occur? Our understanding of Vorthak behavior suggests that any approach by other species should result in immediate aggressive response. Tommy looked up from where he was digging through his backpack. Oh, that's easy. I found him when his ship crashed on our colony world. He was hurt really bad, and everyone else was too scared to help him. The simple statement sent shockwaves through the chamber. A Vorthak ship had crashed on a human colony world, and instead of evacuating the planet, they had helped it? Ambassador Clicktar's mandibles chattered rapidly. A crashed Vorthak should have been even more dangerous. Wounded predators are typically more aggressive, not less. Well, yeah, he was pretty mad when I first found him, Tommy admitted, pulling what appeared to be a hand-drawn picture from his bag. He was all roaring and trying to scare me away, but I could tell he was scared too. His wing was all torn up, and there was this big piece of metal stuck in his side. He held up his drawing, a child's crayon rendering of a massive red creature with golden scales, clearly injured and clearly in pain. Despite the simplistic artwork, there was something in the picture that conveyed genuine emotion. I know what it's like to be scared and hurt, Tommy continued matter-of-factly. When my parents died in that transport accident, I was in the hospital for weeks, and I was so scared all the time. Nobody should have to feel like that alone. The chamber fell silent. The boy's simple empathy, the ability to see past the monster to the frightened, injured being beneath, was something none of them had considered possible. Captain Chen stepped forward to provide additional context. Tommy was living with his aunt on colony world Kepler 442b. When the Vorthak ship crashed in the forest about 5 kilometers from the settlement, our first response was evacuation protocols. But Tommy slipped away from the shelters during the night. Commander Zilthak hissed in disbelief. A human child approached a wounded Vorthak alone, in the dark? With a first aid kit and some sandwiches, Captain Chen confirmed. By the time our search teams found him the next morning, he was sitting beside the creature, sharing his lunch and reading to it from a storybook. The image was so absurd that several council members struggled to process it. Dr. HFY leaned forward intently. And the creature's response to this approach? Tommy answered before anyone else could. He was really suspicious at first, kept trying to scare me away, but I think he was lonely. When I started reading to him, he got really quiet and just listened. I don't think anyone had ever read to him before. Scarscale rumbled something that might have been agreement, and Tommy reached over to pat the massive snout affectionately. After I helped clean his wounds and gave him some food, he let me get closer. It took 3 days before he let me touch him, and another week before he started talking back. Talking back? Ambassador Veltar's patterns shifted rapidly through confused blues and greens. Vorthaks don't communicate with other species. Sure they do, Tommy said brightly. Scarscale tells me lots of things. He's really smart. He knows about stars and planets and math and all sorts of stuff. He taught me about how his people navigate through space using magnetic fields. The boy turned to his massive companion and made a series of sounds. Not quite human speech, but not entirely unlike it either. The sounds had a musical quality, with rising and falling tones that seemed to carry meaning beyond simple words. Scarscale responded with a rumbling series of harmonic vocalizations that made the chamber's walls vibrate slightly. Tommy nodded enthusiastically, as if he understood perfectly. He says that your translation machines can't hear all the sounds he makes because they're not designed for his frequency range. Most of what he says is in subsonic, like elephants back on Earth. Dr. HFY was frantically adjusting his instruments. Remarkable! If we can recalibrate our systems to include lower frequency ranges. But that doesn't explain the fundamental behavioral change, interrupted Commander Zilthak. Vorthaks are solitary hunters. They don't form social bonds. Tommy looked genuinely puzzled by this statement. But that's not true. Scarscale told me all about his family. His mate and their eggs were killed when their planet was attacked by those metal ships. He's been alone for almost 50 years. The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. The assembled beings exchanged stunned glances as they began to understand what they were hearing. Vorthaks weren't mindless monsters. They were people. People who had lost their families, their worlds, their entire civilization to some unknown enemy. The metal ships, Ambassador Veltar said quietly. Can you describe them? Tommy looked to Scarscale, who rumbled a long, complex response. The boy listened carefully, then turned back to the council. They were machines, not alive. Silver and angular with no windows. They came in huge swarms and just destroyed everything. Scarscale's people tried to fight, but the machines just kept coming. The description sent chills through every being present. What Tommy was describing sounded disturbingly like the Harvester fleets, ancient, automated warships that had appeared sporadically throughout galactic history, devastating entire civilizations before disappearing again. The last confirmed Harvester attack had been over 200 years ago, but the legends spoke of machines that consumed everything in their path. If the Vorthak homeworld was destroyed by Harvesters, Dr. HFY said slowly, then every aggressive encounter we've had with their species. They were survivors, Captain Chen finished grimly. Refugees, probably. Alone, traumatized, lashing out at anything they perceived as a threat. Tommy nodded solemnly. Scarscale says his people used to be really peaceful. They were explorers and artists and scientists. But after the machines came, the only ones left were the warriors who were away from home when it happened. And they were all so angry and sad and scared that they couldn't trust anyone anymore. The boy reached into his backpack again and pulled out what appeared to be a small, intricately carved piece of metal. It gleamed with the same golden color that ran through Scarscale's scales, and it seemed to shift and flow in the light as if it were alive. This is Vorthak art, Tommy explained, holding it up for everyone to see. Scarscale made it for me. It's supposed to represent friendship between different peoples. See how the patterns flow together but stay separate? The artifact was breathtaking in its beauty and complexity. The flowing patterns seemed to tell a story, different forms coming together, supporting each other while maintaining their unique characteristics. It spoke of a culture that understood cooperation and harmony in ways that contradicted everything they thought they knew about the Vorthaks. Commander Zilthak stared at the artifact with something approaching awe. All this time, we've been fighting refugees. Survivors of one of the greatest tragedies in galactic history. And they've been fighting us because they learned that the universe was full of things that wanted to hurt them, Tommy added, with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes displayed. But they're not mean. They're just scared and lonely. Scarscale lifted his great head and looked directly at the assembled council members. When he spoke, his voice was still too low for the translators to properly interpret, but the tone was unmistakable. It carried dignity, sadness, and something that might have been hope. Tommy listened carefully, then translated. He says that when I found him, he had given up. He was ready to die alone because he couldn't imagine trusting anyone again. But I was so little, and I didn't try to hurt him, and I shared my food with him. He says he remembered what it was like to not be afraid. The boy paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. He wants you to know that he's sorry about all the fighting. His people were just so hurt that they couldn't see past their pain anymore. But he thinks maybe it's not too late to change things. Dr. Yexhai stepped forward hesitantly. Would Scarscale be willing to help us understand? If we could learn to communicate with other Vorthax, perhaps we could find a way to end the hostilities. Tommy consulted with his friend again, then smiled broadly. He says yes, he wants to help. He's tired of being alone, and he thinks maybe other Vorthax are tired of it too. The implications were staggering. If they could establish communication with the Vorthax population, if they could address the trauma and loss that drove their aggression, they might be able to end 3 centuries of conflict. More than that, they might gain allies who had survived the Harvesters, beings who had fought against the galaxy's greatest threat and lived to tell about it. Ambassador Clicktar leaned forward, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. The boy seems to be the key to all of this. How did you manage to connect with the creature in a way that no one else has been able to? Tommy shrugged, the gesture so typically human that several council members found it oddly endearing. I just talked to him like he was a person. Because he is a person. Just because someone looks different or scary doesn't mean they're bad. The simple truth of the statement hung in the air. After centuries of conflict, technological analysis, military strategies, and diplomatic negotiations, the solution had been found by a child who simply treated the galaxy's most feared predator with kindness and respect. There's something else, Tommy said, suddenly looking serious. Scarscale says there are still machine ships out there, the Harvesters. They're not gone, just sleeping. But they might wake up again someday. If that happens, all the people in the galaxy need to work together, or the machines will destroy everyone like they destroyed his home. The warning sent ripples of unease through the chamber. The Harvesters were the stuff of legends and nightmares. Ancient automated fleets that appeared without warning, consumed entire civilizations, and then vanished back into the dark spaces between stars. The possibility that they might return was something no one wanted to contemplate. But if the Vorthax had faced them before and survived, their knowledge and experience could be invaluable. The galaxy's greatest enemies might also be its best hope for survival against an even greater threat. Station Commander Thurvok looked around the chamber, seeing new understanding dawning on the faces of his colleagues. It seems we have much to discuss and much to learn, but first I believe we owe young Tommy and his friend our gratitude. They have given us something we never thought possible: hope for peace. Tommy beamed at the praise, then turned to Scarscale and whispered something that made the massive creature rumble with what could only be laughter. The sound was deep and resonant, filling the chamber with warmth instead of fear. For the first time in 300 years, the sound of Vorthax laughter echoed through a space occupied by other species. It was a sound that spoke of joy, of friendship, and of possibilities that no one had dared to imagine. The galaxy was changing, one small act of kindness at a time. 3 weeks had passed since the historic first meeting, and Galactic Council Station Alpha had transformed into something unprecedented, a center for interspecies understanding that included the galaxy's most feared predator as an active participant. The modifications to accommodate Scarscale had become permanent features of the station. Corridors had been widened, ceiling sections raised, and specialized atmospheric processors installed to maintain the environment he needed. But more importantly, the beings who worked and lived on the station had begun to adapt to his presence in ways no one could have anticipated. Dr. HFY had set up a permanent research station in what was now being called the Communication Center, a large chamber where Tommy and Scarscale worked together daily to establish translation protocols for Vorthak language. The work was painstaking and complex, requiring the development of entirely new frequency ranges and harmonic analysis algorithms. The subsonic components carry emotional context, Dr. HFY explained to a gathering of linguists and xenobiologists who had arrived from across the galaxy. While the audible portions convey factual information, it's an incredibly sophisticated system that suggests their species evolved as highly social beings, contrary to all our previous assumptions. Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, helping Scarscale practice phrases in the common galactic tongue. The boy's natural ear for languages had proven invaluable. He could distinguish subtle differences in Vorthak vocalizations that even the most sensitive instruments struggled to detect. "Try the greeting again, Scarscale," Tommy encouraged. "Remember, you have to make the sound more breathy for the fear pheromone species, so they know you're not threatening them." Scarscale rumbled thoughtfully, then produced a carefully modulated sound that the new translation matrix interpreted as, "Greetings. I mean no harm. I come in friendship." The assembled scientists burst into applause. It was the first time anyone had heard a Vorthak speak directly to other species without requiring Tommy as an intermediary. Captain Chen watched from the observation area above, still marveling at how rapidly things had progressed. The boy who had slipped away from evacuation shelters 3 weeks ago was now serving as an informal ambassador between species that had been at war for centuries. "It's remarkable," she said to Ambassador Veltar, who had become a frequent visitor to the communication center. "Tommy doesn't seem to realize he's doing anything extraordinary. To him, this is just making friends." The ambassador's bioluminescent patterns flickered in agreement. "Perhaps that's why he's been so successful. He approaches each interaction without the baggage of history, without preconceptions about what should or shouldn't be possible." Their conversation was interrupted by an excited shout from Tommy. "Dr. HFY, come quick! Scarscale wants to show everyone something really important." The research chamber filled with anticipation as the assembled beings gathered around. Scarscale had lifted his massive head and was making a series of complex gestures with his clawed forelimbs, movements that seemed almost ritualistic in their precision. "This is a formal presentation posture," Tommy explained, his voice carrying uncharacteristic seriousness. "In Vorthak culture, this is how they share really important information with their community." The great creature began to speak, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the modified translation system. The words that emerged were unlike anything they had heard from him before, formal, ancient, and weighted with ceremony. "I speak the memory song of my people," the translation rendered. "I carry the history burden of those who came before. I sing the sorrow tale of the world death, and the hope melody of the new time beginning." What followed was an oral history unlike anything in the galactic archives. Scarscale spoke of his people's civilization, a society of artist warriors who had explored the galaxy not as conquerors, but as seekers of beauty and knowledge. He described their homeworld in terms that painted pictures of breathtaking landscapes and soaring crystal cities. Then came the dark part of the tale, the arrival of the harvesters. The translation system struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in most languages: soul-eating machines, reality devourers, the silence death that consumed not just life but the very possibility of life. "The Starkillers came in numbers beyond counting," Scarscale continued. "They ate the light from our suns, drank the songs from our stones, turned our children's laughter to empty wind. Those who survived did so by becoming what we had never been: alone. angry, afraid. The chamber was utterly silent except for the soft hum of recording equipment capturing every word. This was the first-hand account of a harvester attack, spoken by one who had lived through it. For too many cycles, we forgot who we were before the Star Killers came. We became the rage shadow of our former selves, striking at any who approached because we could no longer remember the difference between friend and foe. Scarscale's great head turned toward Tommy, and his voice softened to something approaching tenderness. Until the small singer found me broken and chose kindness over fear. He reminded me that trust was possible, that gentle touch could exist without hidden threat. Tommy blushed at the attention, but didn't interrupt. He seemed to understand that this moment was bigger than just his friendship with Scarscale. The hope melody begins now, Scarscale continued. If trust can bridge the void between small singer and grief carrier, then perhaps the ancient wounds can heal. Perhaps the people of many worlds can stand together when the Star Killers wake from their deep dreaming. The formal presentation concluded with a sound that no translation system could properly render, a harmonic convergence that seemed to reach directly into the emotional centers of every being present. It spoke of loss and hope, of endings and beginnings, of the possibility of redemption even after centuries of darkness. As the echoes faded, Dr. HFY was the first to break the reverent silence. This changes our understanding of galactic history. If the harvesters are not extinct but merely dormant, then we need to be ready, finished Commander Zilthak, who had arrived during the presentation. And we need allies who have fought them before and survived. Over the following days, word of Scarscale's revelation spread throughout the galactic community. Xenoarchaeologists began re-examining ancient sites that might show evidence of harvester attacks. Military strategists studied the few surviving records of machine fleet encounters. Diplomats reached out cautiously to other Vorthak survivors scattered across the galaxy. But perhaps the most significant development was the gradual change in how the station's inhabitants interacted with Scarscale himself. The initial terror and caution gave way to curiosity, then to something approaching acceptance. Beings who had spent their entire lives viewing Vorthaks as monsters began to see the individual behind the fearsome appearance. It was Ambassador Clicktar who first dared to approach Scarscale directly without Tommy as an intermediary. The insectoid diplomat's mandibles chattered nervously as she stepped into the communications center during one of the creature's language practice sessions. "Honorable Scarscale," she said, using the formal address that Tommy had taught them. "I bring greetings from the Hive Collective. We wish to learn more about your people's history with the Star Killers." Scarscale considered her carefully, his golden eyes reflecting depths of intelligence that few had bothered to look for before. When he responded, it was in carefully modulated Common Galactic, each word chosen with precision. "Greetings, Clicktar of the Hive Collective. I am honored by your approach without fear. Yes, I will share the memory burden of the Star Killer time. But first, may I ask, do your people know the joy song of the nest builders? My kind always found beauty in the way hive minds create harmony from individual voices." The question caught the ambassador completely off guard. In all their preparations for potential Vorthak contact, no one had anticipated that these creatures might express interest in other cultures, might find beauty in their ways of life. Clicktar's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this unexpected development. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, we do know that joy song. Would you like to hear it?" What followed was the first recorded cultural exchange between a Vorthak and another species that did not involve Tommy as an intermediary. Clicktar sang the ancient harmonies of her people, complex clicking patterns that spoke of unity and cooperation, while Scarscale listened with obvious pleasure and occasionally added his own harmonic contributions. Tommy watched from across the chamber, grinning with the satisfaction of seeing his friends getting along. To him, this was exactly how things should be: different people learning about each other and finding common ground. Captain Chen found him there an hour later, still watching as Clicktar attempted to teach Scarscale one of the simpler nest-building songs. "You did this, you know," she said quietly, sitting down beside the boy. "None of this would have been possible without you." Tommy looked confused. "All I did was help a friend who was hurt. Anyone would have done that." "No, Tommy. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have seen a monster and run away. You saw someone in pain and decided to help. That's what made all the difference." The boy considered this seriously, then shrugged in the way that only children could. "Well, maybe other people just needed to see that Scarscale isn't scary once you get to know him. He's actually really gentle and kind. He just needed someone to remind him that it was safe to be gentle again." As if summoned by their conversation, Scarscale's great head turned toward them. The massive creature had clearly been listening, and his expression, as much as could be read on features so alien, seemed to reflect deep emotion. He said something in his own language, a complex series of harmonics that the boy understood immediately. "He says thank you," Tommy translated, "not just for helping when he was hurt, but for showing him that he could trust again. He says I gave him back something he thought was lost forever." Captain Chen felt tears prick at her eyes. The simple exchange contained depths of meaning that resonated beyond language barriers or species differences. It spoke to something fundamental about connection and healing, about the power of kindness to bridge even the greatest divides. It was then that Tommy did something that would be remembered in galactic history for millennia to come. Without any ceremony or announcement, the 8-year-old boy simply stood up and walked over to where Scarscale's massive head rested on the chamber floor. The great creature watched him approach with those golden eyes that had once struck terror into the hearts of entire civilizations. Tommy reached out and gently placed both of his small hands on either side of Scarscale's snout, a gesture so trusting and innocent that every being in the chamber held their breath. "Thank you for being my friend," Tommy said simply. "Thank you for trusting me and for letting me help you remember how to trust others." And then, with the casual affection of any child saying goodnight to a beloved pet, Tommy leaned forward and planted a soft kiss on the tip of Scarscale's massive snout. The gesture lasted only a moment, but its impact rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Every being present, scientists, diplomats, military officers, station personnel, stared in stunned silence at what they had just witnessed. A human child had just kissed a Vorthok, the galaxy's most feared predator. The creature whose very name could clear a system had just been shown the ultimate gesture of trust and affection by the smallest and most vulnerable member of the assembled species. Scarscale's reaction was perhaps even more remarkable than Tommy's gesture. The massive creature's eyes closed, and a sound emerged from his throat, not a growl or a roar, but something that could only be described as a purr. It was a sound of pure contentment, of happiness, of love freely given and joyfully received. When the moment passed and Tommy stepped back with his characteristic grin, the chamber erupted into something unprecedented. Spontaneous applause from beings representing dozens of species, all celebrating a moment of connection that transcended every boundary they had ever known. Dr. Yexhai was frantically recording everything, his multiple eyes wide with amazement. The biochemical readings are extraordinary. The level of trust, the absence of any fear response, the genuine affection between species that evolved on completely different worlds under completely different conditions. But his scientific observations were interrupted by Scarscale himself, who lifted his great head and addressed the entire assembly in carefully pronounced Common Galactic. "I speak now to all who gather here," the creature said, his voice carrying a dignity and gravitas that commanded attention. "Small singer Tommy has shown me that healing is possible, that friendship can bridge any divide, that trust can overcome even the deepest wounds." He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that no longer showed fear when they looked at him. "My people have been alone too long, angry too long, afraid too long, but if a small human can see past our pain to the beings we truly are, then perhaps others can as well. I pledge myself to this work of healing, this building of bridges, this creation of hope, where there was only darkness." The great creature lowered his head toward Tommy, who reached up to pat his snout with easy familiarity. "And I pledge that when the Star Killers wake from their deep dreaming, they will not find us scattered and afraid as they found my people long ago. They will find us united, standing together, ready to defend all life in this galaxy." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Tommy barely noticed it. He was too busy telling Scarscale about his plans for tomorrow. Apparently, they were going to visit the station's hydroponics bay to see if Vorthax might enjoy gardening. Captain Chen watched the boy chatter away to his massive friend and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new steps toward a future that none of them could have imagined just a month ago. But for now, in this moment, an 8-year-old human had shown the galaxy something it had forgotten how to see. That love was stronger than fear, that kindness could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could change everything. The kiss that a little boy had given to the snout of the galaxy's most feared predator became the symbol of a new age. It was captured in artworks and remembered in songs, studied by scholars and celebrated by children across the known worlds. But perhaps most importantly, it was the first note in a new harmony that began to spread throughout the galaxy. A song of hope that would unite disparate peoples in the face of challenges yet to come. The harvesters might wake from their ancient slumber, but they would find a galaxy very different from the one they had terrorized before. They would find a galaxy that had learned the power of a small boy's simple kindness, and the miracle that could happen when someone chose to see a friend where others saw only a monster. The galaxy had learned to sing a new song, and at its heart was the memory of an 8-year-old boy who had kissed a dragon and taught the universe how to love.